So we have a recording. Okay, so this week we're talking about indie games. Just our normal reminder, we are recording now. So, you know, any comments that you make either in the chat or on audio are going to be part of the recording on Blackboard and YouTube. So just keep that in mind. But, you know, I encourage you guys to ask questions, and you know, if you have any questions at any point, please do that. So anyway, this week we're talking about indie games. I'm mostly going to be showing some examples. I'll talk a little bit about the history, but we'll see a lot of different examples of games. And I think indie games is a good thing for us to take inspiration from, because we are, you know, making games at the moment mostly on our own, and so there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And a lot of the tools that we're using come out of the indie game movement. We really wouldn't be able to have a class like this if it weren't for the games that we're going to be talking about and the developers that we're going to be talking about today. So indie games is kind of like generally a term that describes games that are made by independent game makers outside of a big studio or big publisher. That it's kind of like a loose umbrella term at this point. We'll look at how it has applied to different sort of types of games, but essentially means if you're like an individual or if you're a group, or you know, sometimes you know they're made by larger studios, but it's basically people that are outside of like a large structure, like a big game developer like Nintendo or other things like that. So indie games have existed for as long as video games have existed in one form or another. They're a lot more accessible these days, but there have always been people who have been making games on their own outside of the publishing industry. Rogue, which is a game that we talked about last week when we were talking about game genre, is an example of a game that was made a long time ago, but it was made by 3 developers kind of as a hobby project. Oops, this didn't quite fit. More recently, like in the past like 10 to 15 years, we've seen this like really big explosion with the internet and different digital publishing tools that makes it really easy for independent and hobbyist developers to produce and distribute games on their own. And as I mentioned, those tools are obviously what we're using in the class. Like Godot is a really good example of that. Pascal editor is a good example of that. The Sprite editor that some of you guys are using is an example of that. So all of these tools, the ability to do this stuff, like really didn't exist like when I was first learning how to make games, like really not until recently. One of the first indie games that has a big influence on games that came after it is ZZT. I'll play a short clip of that. I'm not going to play the whole ones of all these clips, but you guys have the notes, so I encourage you to check these out, you know, on your own time. So you can see it's kind of like basic graphics. It's similar to Rogue. Rogue was modeled after ZZT in some ways. And ZZT also had a map editor, which is another reason that I want to include it, because it allowed users to create and share their own maps. Which is a big part of you know, gaming today, is users creating their own content within the platform of an existing game framework. So it was really unique and innovative in that sense that you could create your own maps. So that's ZZT. I definitely recommend checking out that game and exploring the history of it. Game Maker is one of the first platforms that was created for people to make their own games. This is just kind of a random clip I found that's 100 Game Maker games in 10 minutes. So it's just short clips of a lot of different games. So that's just a few examples, but you can kind of get a sense from even just a few of those games that a lot of the indie games have some similarities, but also a lot of differences. Like there's just within those few different games, we saw like a large cross section of different game genres. But there's a similarity in terms of the graphics, in terms of this sort of like creative style. You saw a lot of like mishmashing of like different aesthetics and like different concepts and stuff like that. So indie games, that's one of the big ways that they differ from mainstream games, is because they don't have to, cater to a large audience. They're not worried about like selling tons and tons of copies, so they can be very, very specific, or sort of like small micro games or things like that. So Game Maker is from 1999. This is one of the early popular games that was made on Game Maker. It's called Cave Story, by a Japanese developer and artist. So Cave Story is like one of the first big independent games that like a lot of people downloaded and a lot of people were a big fan of. So it sort of showed that there was this potential that even if you were making a game on your own, that it could still be a really popular game, and that a lot of people would interact with it. Let's keep going. So this one is one that is kind of interesting both from a political and sociological perspective, but also in the history of games. This one is called Super Columbine Massacre RPG, and it's a very controversial game because it basically makes gameplay out of the Columbine shooting. So I guess I should definitely give a trigger warning, a content warning for this slide.
I still cannot believe this game exists.
Yeah, sorry, I should give a content warning before I go to this slide, but we're already here. So yeah, this was made on RPG Maker, which is another independent game style clip. There's a trailer for this. I'm just going to play the beginning of it. I'm not going to play the actual gameplay because it is a little bit violent.
Well, should violent video game?
But there's some context that you see at the beginning of this video that I want you guys to see, and then we'll talk about it again.
Games be made illegal. You can email us your opinion at sendit.
So you can see just from the comments at the beginning of this video that it's a very controversial game that some people think is really bad, and other people, video game critics, actually think is really important. And I'll leave that up to you guys to decide what you think about that, about making a game about a tragic event. I think what's interesting about it is that if you think about what the difference between making a game versus making like a film or a book about something like this, it really makes you think about how games differ as a medium. Obviously, there are plenty of films and books that were made about the Columbine shooting that are taken, basically uncontroversially as, serious forms of art. Because the game puts you in the position of one of the shooters, of course, it creates a different experience that, it could be interpreted or seem kind of offensive. The idea that we would actually play out this role as one of the shooters. So I think it's interesting to think about. Is part of what is interesting here is that of course a big studio would never make a game like this because it would just attract too much controversy, and maybe it would sell well. You could argue that like Grand Theft Auto is basically the same thing in a certain way. But they wouldn't necessarily want to attract the attention, and they wouldn't want to be making that type of a political statement. So because it's an indie
game, a game called Manhunt.
No, I haven't.
It's the same people who made GTA Rockstar. That game was very controversial.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's banned
Uh,
from America. You can't even buy it anymore. It's banned. They banned that
oh,
game a long
really?
time. Yeah. 1 and 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I'll have to
Literally
check
on
that out.
sale on PSN?
What was that?
Oh yeah, it
Manhunt.
is. I saw it
You
on.
can buy it on PSN, on like
Oh,
PS4
okay.
and stuff, and PS2 classics.
Yeah, I just saw that too.
Yeah, I know, but
Yeah.
yeah, but still they banned it off the stores.
Right. Well, so that's another thing that that this game touches on is just kind of the history of video games being blamed for violence in real life. And that's something I actually have more of an opinion on because I think there's like substantial research that shows there's no connection between playing video games and actually committing crime or being violent in real life. It's something that the media will use as a way to blame somebody else for problems that come from lots of different sources. So I don't know about Manhunt. I can't say whether or not it's something that people should play, but my general instinct is that games shouldn't be banned, and that people tend to look at games that include violence and other things like that as these sort of like political things that cause violence or are the reason for different things. And there's lots of studies that have been done that show that there's no real connection between those things. So anyway, definitely a interesting and controversial topic. I haven't actually played this game. I've watched videos of it. I can't really say whether it's something that I think is good or bad, but I do think it definitely is good that it exists. It brings up a lot of interesting questions about how games work as a medium and how we can represent life and talk about life and comment on life in a video game and how that's different from other mediums. So that's Super Columbine Massacre.
Wait, do you know that they still trying to ban GTA? Like they're going back into trying to ban GTA again, which makes
What?
no sense.
Really?
Yeah.
What
Yeah,
else?
that doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of news people and politicians who would like there to be who would like it if video games were the reason that people did bad things, because it removes responsibility from politicians for doing what they're supposed to do. So anyway, let's continue. So let's look at another early indie game from 2005. So this is one reason that I show this game. Let me turn the volume down a bit, is because it's one of the first like 3D games that was made as an indie game. And so this developer had to have like a little bit more kind of developing experience to be able to create the game. So it's a little more unusual. We'll see that there's some, new tools in the future that make it a lot easier to do that. But it's kind of a wild game because it's not, it's not bound to any of the sort of standards or rules that normal games work by. It's just this kind of like artistic expression of this one developer's kind of like view of what a game is. So that's Darwinia. So Syoban Action is a 2007 game that was very popular and also kind of controversial, but for different reasons. And this is what you guys are going to write about for your blog. And I'll show a little bit of this. I don't want to ruin it, so I'm just going to show a little bit of this clip.
Oh yeah, I know that game.
Yeah.
What's his face played PewDiePie game?
Hold on, I can't really hear you.
I said PewDiePie play that game.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. So that's kind of interesting, considering that your assignment could be a video commentary. But yeah, so that's just the first level of that game. I'll let you guys check it out and see how it works on your own. Some of you guys are going to like it. Some of you guys are really going to hate it. I think it's really interesting in terms of how it works, both in terms of like game genre and in terms of indie games. but you guys will get a chance to play that and react to that. So let's keep going. So this game is called Passage. It's by a video game artist named Jason Rohrer. It's from 2007, and it's a very simple game. You don't really do that much in it. It features like a couple of an elderly couple, and they're not elderly the whole time. It features a couple, and it goes through their whole life in the course of this like very short video game experience. And so it's kind of like you start to see with indie games, people are using game aesthetics and game technologies to make experiences that wouldn't normally fit into the sort of umbrella of gaming when you think of early games like, you know, Space Invaders or Mario or things like that. This is also, almost all of these games you can play for free because they're indie games, but this is one that you can just download from his website. So yeah, you can get a sense of that. So it's using the aesthetics and, you know, the music and all these different tropes of video games, but it's giving us a very different type of experience than we're used to. So that's another thing that we see with indie games, is a sort of broadening of the types of experiences that we see in games. So let's keep going. Flow is I think a PlayStation game from 2007, so similar year, made by a very small studio, and it's a more kind of like abstract game experience, again with more of an attention to aesthetics and creating sort of like a visual experience.
Oh yeah, I've seen that before. That was on the PlayStation.
Yeah. So yeah, there's still like game mechanics going on here that are familiar to us, but they're using like abstraction and you know, more sort of high fidelity music than what we're used to with games, to create kind of more of a visual and aesthetic experience.
Wait, what's the name of the company who made this game?
It was that game. It was that game company, Santa
Monica Studios.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
so
know,
you guys know this game.
They're not really a small company though. They made God of War. I think.
Yes, I know.
Yeah, but at first they were small.
Yes, I know.
What was it called? It said it at the beginning somewhere.
Santa Monica Studios, and they
Santa
were
Monica.
super villain.
Yeah, so they may have become, you know, larger at some point. Oh, yeah,
It's like
they
the
did
same
make
thing.
God of
It's
War.
like same thing with FromSoft. They made like other games and stuff that people don't know about.
Yeah.
That's
Like
besides
Retro.
from Dark Souls.
I mean, I would even say like Insomniac too. Like they started out with Spyro, and then moved on to like Ratchet and Clank.
Actually, that is incorrect. The game they started off with is a first-person shooter called Disruptor.
Yeah, Disruptor, then
Oh,
Spyro, and then Ratchet and Clank.
So actually, it's on Wikipedia. It
know
says
that.
Flow was originally created as a Flash game by 2 developers, and then it was reworked as a PlayStation game by that game company. So I think it may have been distributed or kind of like rebuilt, but it was originally created by just 2 people. So I think Santa Monica probably took it over at some point and made like a, you know, bigger version of it.
Oh yeah,
but it
and
was
also
originally-
I think they made Journey.
Oh yeah. Journey is another one that I could include on here. Kevin, do you have a question?
Yeah, also that game looks like Electroplankton.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of games that kind of have that style now. So another one from 2008 is Dear Esther. You guys might have heard of this game.
Dear Esther,
It's also very controversial.
the girls
It's
do not
basically like
marry.
an hour-long film
I've
in the
noticed
form
that
of a
this
video
year they
game.
seem to
Like it's
shun
almost
boys.
all the whole
Maybe
thing
it's
has
the
this like
depletion of the
narrative
fishes stock
commentary
driving them away.
going over it, and you're really just like walking around.
When you-
I actually don't really like this game very much.
Oh,
but
wait.
it was like
I know a game that's similar to this. It's called Death Stranding, a walking simulator. All you do is
Yeah.
walking for ladders. So dumb.
yeah.
It's called FedEx, the game. That's what it. Yeah, that's what it is, bro. It's a delivery game.
It is. That's the funny
You gotta
part.
deliver Popeyes, bro.
Yup.
Yeah, so what you guys are kind of talking about, kind of, that whole controversy of a walking simulator, this idea, really actually comes from Dear Esther, which people were really unhappy about. I have a link to a video here, which I don't think I'll be able to. I think it only lets me play one tab at a time, so I'll just leave
They
that
think
for you guys
Kojima's
to.
the god of gaming.
I'll leave that for you guys to check out later. But in that commentary video, what you'll see is the guy is basically ranting about how it's not a game the whole time. And so I think it is kind of interesting, like what we consider a game versus not a game. Is it enough to be built in a game engine? Is it enough to have like game, interactivity where you're moving the character around, or does it have to have goals? Does it have to have rewards? Does it have to have obstacles like we expect in a regular game? So as you guys are kind of talking about with Death Stranding, when we talk about games and we talk about game genres, there is a lot of sort of argument about what constitutes interactivity and what a game needs to have in order to qualify it as a game.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Oh, I know there's one game. It's called Penn and Teller Road Trip or something like that. It's a road simulator. It's called it's the Penn and Teller
Desert
game.
Bus.
Wait, what
What is
happened?
it?
The game you're talking about. Well, the specific one is called Desert Bus.
Yeah,
Desert Bus.
Desert Bus, yeah. Desert Bus.
That actually sounds pretty fun.
That's hilarious. You
it's
just
not.
go one direction.
It's
It's
really
not. It's
Like, look up
hilarious.
ABTN's review of it. It is the most boring thing ever.
Yeah, I seen people on Twitch just like talk. Dude, they just play. It's not even a game. It's just like, I don't know, man. This is hilarious. I just see it on Twitch one time. I was just like laughing. It's just people
So let's
just
take a
talking.
look at another sort of like narrative aesthetic-based game. This is called The Graveyard. And this game is pretty simple. It just follows an old woman walking through a graveyard. Not really much else happens. It's developed by a game company called Tale of Tales that specifically makes games that don't have the sort of like arcade goal-oriented play experience that we expect from games. This is like a deliberately slow, deliberately kind of boring meditative game where we're just following a very slow-moving character through a graveyard.
Yeah, it's kind
so
of
again,
depressing though.
So I think one of the things we're seeing with indie games is, again, this sort of broadening of the types of experiences that can be represented by games. When we think of games, we tend to think of Space Invaders or Mario or things that are supposed to be fun, like colors, sort of like ridiculous. But as games have become a more widespread medium, developers, especially with indie game tools, have become interested in creating other types of experiences that you might associate with like film or novels or things that explore other than just basic arcade gameplay, things like emotional stories and other types of narratives and stuff like that. So we're seeing a few examples of this. I'll let you guys finish that video on your own. And there's a link here to their organization called notgames.org, which is kind of like specifically talking about using game technology to make things that are not games, to make things that are just aesthetic or narrative experiences. Then for me, like World of Goo, we start to transition into this world where indie games are sort of actually innovating in terms of what happens in the gameplay, rather than just broadening the aesthetic and narrative experience of games. They're actually making innovative gameplay as well.
Oh yeah, I used to play that game. Yeah, I used to play older games. World of Goo was that Fire something, if Infernal something. Oh yeah,
I
it's
don't
called
know.
it's called Little Inferno. That's right, Little Inferno.
So yeah, we'll just watch a little bit of this one. Keep going. So this is using platformer physics, but kind of like taking it in this new direction.
Wait, is it okay? Can I share suggest you a video I can send on the chat or no?
I think maybe later, but for now, I think you have to like set it up to share the audio. So I want to wait. I don't want to disconnect.
Oh, okay.
Quite yet. Yeah, but at the end we can do that. So that's World of Goo. Next, we also have Braid from 2008. This is a big game in the indie game world in terms of its innovation in gameplay, specifically through the way that it uses time and how the player has control over time. We'll watch a little bit of this. This is a speed run, so it's not what you expect from gameplay, but it's just a good way to show. This game also has kind of an innovative narrative. And you can see there's a lot of detail in the art. It has this kind of like different aesthetic experience where it's using this sort of like watercolor style. It's using classical music to kind of signify that it's like trying to be a little bit more of a, you know, serious experience. I guess we're not gonna get, the first level doesn't have any of the.
That's pretty cool though, I'm not gonna lie. And mix it up,
Okay,
like
so yeah.
it has like puzzle games within it, like platforming. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to show, let's go back a second, is that the main game mechanic is that you can kind of control time. So you can like reverse time, and time kind of is changed in all these different scenes. And then the narrative of the game also has to do with time. So it's all kind of like tied together. So that's a game that I definitely recommend checking out. It's pretty fun. Another similar game that I like a lot is Blueberry Garden. This is a game that kind of has this. Let me turn it down a little bit.
Look at what I'm doing with these rocks. It's not like I need them to climb. I can just fly. See, look at me. Oh.
So
energies.
I could only find a commentary video for this
Shit.
one, so I'm not going to talk over it.
Oh man. You're turning violet.
But what I like about Blueberry Garden, besides the aesthetics, which I think are very cool, is that there isn't a lot of instructions. There's not a lot of hand-holding. You kind of have to figure things out on your own. And so that's another thing that is particular to indie games, is that the experience doesn't have to be like, you know, here's this like really structured tutorial where you learn how to do everything. They can kind of expect you to do a little bit more exploration to figure out how the game mechanics work. Minecraft is included in here just because it is an indie game. We don't think of it as an indie game because it's like one of the most popular games ever, but it was developed by one person.
Let's go to a place
2011
where everything is made of blocks.
But this really
With
brings
the
me
only
back,
limit
dude. This
is your
nostalgia.
imagination. Let's go wherever you want to go. Climb the tallest mountains. Venture down to the darkest caves.
Dude, this said that Notch stole his game though.
Build anything
Notch's
you
game
want.
is garbage.
Day or night,
What is
rain
it?
or shine.
No, I said
This
Notch
is the
stole his
most
game to
significant
Microsoft.
sandbox you'll ever set foot in. Build a majestic castle. Invent a
So yeah, I'm assuming you guys are familiar with Minecraft, but it's important to include it in the sort of history of indie games. This game is called Dysphoria by Ananthropy. It's from 2012. It's another game that kind of like explores something that you would probably never see in a mainstream game. It's sort of exploring through game mechanics the experience of gender dysphoria. show a little clip of some of the different mechanics that are used. And this was, you guys are probably familiar with Newgrounds. So it's distributed on a platform that we associate with kind of casual games or web games. Let's skip ahead to some of the gameplay. And so you can see in this game, it's kind of using game mechanics to comment on these experiences of gender dysphoria. So there isn't really like a win state for these games, but it's more using interactivity and the experience of games to make commentary on this experience. Another game that kind of falls in this category is Depression Quest, which is more of like a interactive fiction in some ways, but has game elements and has been very controversial. We don't have to get into all the controversy surrounding it, but it's just another example of an indie game developer who, because of the indie tools that we have, is able to make a game exploring something, you know, an emotional and psychological aspect of their life that you probably wouldn't see reflected in, you know, a typical video game. Papers, Please is another example of an indie game exploring kind of a political theme. The gameplay in this game is about basically trying to get through immigration and, you know, all of the sort of like bureaucracy and all the things that you have to go through to do that. And so I think this is a great example in terms of showing games, again, using game aesthetics, using game tropes, exploring political themes, exploring, you know, experiences, and putting us, you know, as a user in the experience that we might never have had before, so we can kind of like understand a new point of view and a new experience.
Yeah, that game was really big back then.
Yeah. Oquonie is a nice mobile game. I include it here basically because you know, there's some indie games that happen on different platforms, and we're going to see a couple games that are using the mobile platform to their advantage. So instead, for this game, it's, you know, it's a mostly aesthetic experience. There's puzzles, but it's really abstract. There's no real instructions, and everything is controlled just through simple touches. And so it's a kind of game that you might not necessarily need to be like a, you know, really intense gamer who has a huge PC and has a special setup and all this stuff. So indie games are kind of like broadening the audience for games, as well as some of the gameplay, game mechanics, and the aesthetics as well. And this is a collaboration between a developer and an illustrator. So the illustrator makes a lot of work that looks like this that might, you know, fall into like a comic book or cartoon genre. And the developer took those and put them into this game system that uses no text at all. Like, it's all just intuitive, understanding the puzzles through iconography and different gestures. Another game like that by an indie developer, Techori.
Hey guys, Breakthrough Gamer here with an indie game.
This has some commentary. I like the perspective in this game. Let's jump ahead a little bit because you'll see where, again, you see in indie games, because it's just like this one game, you can kind of take more risks and do things that you wouldn't necessarily do in a mainstream game. And then there's a lot of, you know, kind of like back and forth between more mainstream games and what's happening in indie games.
Okay.
So there's a lot of kind of crazy mechanics in this game.
Oh, save. Okay, cool.
And you can see if you listen to the commentary,
So
the commentator is trying to like basically figure out how everything
We
fits
gotta
together.
go this way? That's my guess. That's my best guess. There was a small little video on this if you want to search it up. And that's what the guy did. And
So let's keep going, but you know, you guys can watch these videos on your own. Here's Plug and Play. This was a pretty popular game that got made out of an animation. again, kind of similar thing where it's an illustrator, an artist, an animator who collaborated with a developer to make a pretty simple video game. They made a new game, I think, last year that's a little bit more complex, but has the same aesthetics and some of the same themes. And again, this is more just like an interactive cartoon in some ways. Like the gameplay is very simple. There's not really like, there's sort of these like very small mini puzzle type things, but most of it is just kind of a cartoon aesthetic experience. Stardew Valley is a game that you guys are probably familiar with. Another example of like, you know, kind of a labor of love. The developer built it by themselves over the course of like 5 years, which actually, when it comes to games, 5 years is not that long of a development time period. But this is kind of a story, like the development of this game has become kind of this like mythological story at this point in game development, where they were creating it for so long, and then it, you know, just absolutely blew up when it was finally released and became a very popular game.
Yeah, that game is really fun.
Yeah.
But
and this game is actually pretty. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that it's really crazy how one person just did the whole thing by himself.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, the game is pretty similar to other games. Like, it uses pixel art, it uses the same kind of like simulation. Like, it has a farming and it has resource management. So it's not exactly innovative in terms of the mechanics or the aesthetics or anything like that, but it is innovative in terms of the narrative and the way that things fit together, and just the production of the game. And all of that kind of goes into the game experience, which you know, is very unique. So I guess it kind of stops there. The game that I would show now that I've been playing lately is Outer Wilds, which I've mentioned before. I don't have a video for that one in the notes. I should add one in there. It's actually distributed by a big company, but it was developed by just a few people over the course of like almost 10 years. And it's the way that it fits narrative and game design together is really incredible. I really recommend that game. But I don't have a video of it, so we won't show that. But anyway, these are just a few links to indie game sites. You guys have probably seen this stuff, but you know, if you want to see more of the stuff that's out there, itch.io is oh, I forgot I can't open links here, so I'll just talk about them. You guys can check them out. We're going to actually publish our games on itch.io later in the semester, just to kind of get the experience of doing that and see how that works. Another thing that's interesting about itch is that a lot of people are not just publishing games on there, but they're publishing game assets. So if you are a developer and you want to work with some art or some music, you can find assets, or you can find somebody to collaborate with on there without necessarily having to do everything yourself. So it's almost like a crowdsourcing or networking way to create games. So yeah, you guys can check these out. Indie Games is more of a review site. Indiecade is like a big sort of like conference and festival and competition for games, and so that's a really good place to check out like what are the more sort of like innovative new trends in indie games. And then Game Jolt is also just kind of like a blog and review site where you'll see a lot of indie games. So these won't open in this window because I have the audio enabled, so I'll let you guys check those out on your own. But I think that's it for now. Any questions on any of that stuff or any comments?
Yeah. Man, it's insane.
Yeah, Brian, what's up?
Yeah, man, it's insane how far indie games have come.
Yeah, yeah, it's been interesting.
People, like, go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah, I'm just saying, like, as somebody who's been, you know, like my first games were Flash games, so I've kind of seen, you know, all the different tools, and, you know, when I first started trying to make games, how much more, you know, daunting and confusing it was than it is today.
For reals. Anyway, I just wanted to say that there's these two indie games that I also recommend that everyone here maybe looks up. They're not completed yet. They're still in development. They're called Sarah Myths Awaken and Psilocybil.
Wait, Psilocybil, and what was the first one?
Zara Myths Awaken.
Okay, Zara Myths Awaken. Cool, I'll check those out. Any other recommendations for indie games from anybody?
I got one.
Okay, John?
This one came out in 2018, Celeste. Do you know about that one?
Celeste.
Yeah, I play Celeste.
No, I don't.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Cool. I'll check that out.
It's like an
Anybody
8-bit
know
2D
Katana
platformer.
Zero?
Okay, we have too many people talking at once. Can you guys raise your hands? Natalie.
Actually, I'm currently playing like indie games right now on PC. I don't know if anybody heard of Phasmophobia and Pacify. Those are two horror games.
Yeah, I've heard of
I haven't heard of those, but what was the first one?
Phasmophobia
Phasmophobia. Okay, I'll check that out.
and Pacify with a Y at the end.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Any other recs? Hakev?
Yeah, so you can play Noita. What's the other one? Wargroove, Skull, the Hero Slayer. The Binding of Isaac.
That's a good one.
You see Undertale.
Yeah, we talked about that one before.
Risk of Rain.
Oh yeah, Undertale I should definitely have on here.
You can play Risk of Rain, Dead Cells, Forger, Hades, Nuclear Throne. That's my favorite. Undermine, and
Great.
Spelunky 2.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good one. Cool. Well, I'm gonna stop the recording now.